This is ContactTalkRadio.com, consciousness in action, and you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sherry Horn Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on October 7th, 2021 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. Today, I'm very pleased to announce that my guest is professional astrologer, author, and lecturer, John Townley, who I'll be introducing properly in just a few moments. First, my usual housekeeping stuff. So you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking anytime by simply going to my website, karmicevolution.com, and clicking on the banner in the upper right-hand corner labeled Radio Show. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the show live, or you can access the recordings, the archived recordings, where there's a listing. So if you've missed any shows or you want to re-listen to one again, feel free to go there anytime. Separately, I would be thrilled if you would follow me on my Facebook page, which is called Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. And it's there you can also sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. Now, I wanted to mention one more time. I mentioned this last week, but for those of you who missed it, I wanted to mention that the Astrological Society of Princeton, an organization whose board I'm on, is offering their annual membership right now for only $35 per year. And that means if you become a member, you'll be able to attend their Zoom webinars from October through June. So it's the beginning of their season. And you can have access to those webinars or lectures that you can't attend virtually. And it costs you only $5 per month. So it's $35 for the year, $5 for the month. And their lecture year starts this Sunday, October 10th, with a webinar by John Townley, who I'm interviewing today. So hopefully you will be interested enough to check it out. Future webinars will include astrologers such as Robert Hand, who's not only a founding member of the Astrological Society of Princeton, known as ASP, but obviously has written a great many books, including Planets in Transit, which is my personal favorite. And also people like Bruce Schofield and David Hamblin, who've also added their insightful astrological commentary to this show, among others who you will undoubtedly find interesting. I've been a member since early 2000s, and ASP dates back to the early 1970s and is pretty much renowned for its professional presenters, its curriculum, and its dedication to astrology and to presenting legitimate, wise, and very studied astrologer presentations. In addition, ASP is taking sign-ups right now for their Beginning Astrology Part 1 virtual class, which starts October 19th. So if you want to learn more about astrology, engage in interesting topics every month, and stay connected through a great group, you can find all of this information on aspnj.org. One more time, that's aspnj.org. So check it out. Finally, I'm still offering my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners for only $99. For those who want to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, who desire to move from chaos to clarity in your relationships, career, finances, and or health, to heal old karmic wounds and co-create your own future happiness and success, and to awaken to your true potential and highest destiny in this lifetime. This is easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer for listeners only, a 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at Sherry, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com and book your reading today. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. We're just past yesterday's October 6th Libra New Moon, which occurred at 13 degrees and 25 minutes of Libra, and Pluto's station direct at 24 degrees 19 minutes of Capricorn. So first and foremost, we're to plant new seeds under this new moon energy still that revolve around themes of partnership. But in doing so, we might ask ourselves, who is the one partner we'll be with forever and ever, the one who makes us feel most secure, the one we love and trust unconditionally? Well, if the answer isn't you, that you're your own best partner in life, then this Libra New Moon acts as a reminder for us to plant seeds that strengthen our relationship to ourselves. And it stands to reason that if and when we develop a strong inner sense of trust and security, that this is what will reflect out into the world and attract back to us in the form of our external partners. Now, Mars joined the Libra and Sun moon mix, and all three quincunx Uranus and Taurus at this lunation too, asking us to change our values in the way that we deal with others. Do we compromise, for example, all the time, or do we adjust our behavior now? Perhaps make the other person or party acquiesce to our demands for a change. And such changes can help us avoid both indecision and passive-aggressive responses down the line, as those two those two are the more archetypally negative side effects of Libra energy. So we see this happening in the outside world, and I mentioned this last week, but since the lunation, some progress was made, and that happened yesterday, toward agreement between parties in the U.S. Congress on lifting the U.S. debt ceiling, though only through December. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of details other than to say that should the U.S. have defaulted on its debts, the financial markets would have been so rattled that we would have more than likely, and predicted by many financial people, including those in our government, but not only, but the markets would have tanked and caused another recession. It also our debt ceiling revolves around our credit reputation out in the world. And many financial members had been warning yesterday that that's already started to happen because of the threat of us not raising our debt ceiling. So let's suffice it to say that at this lunation, one party stood its ground until the other gave way, at least slightly. However, we should see more progress down the line as additional planets station direct within the next 10 days or so, and I'm going to talk about that now. So Pluto, as I said, stationed at 24 degrees 19 minutes of Capricorn yesterday, October 6th, though he's not yet up to speed. So remember, he is the slowest moving planet. All right, dwarf planet, if you insist, but only in stature, not in behavior, who takes 248 years to complete one cycle around the sun. So his stations take time to rev up. And one of Pluto's aims is to bring hidden things to light, particularly those with Pluto-related themes, such as money, power, and sex. So here are some of the things I've noticed this past week that seem synonymous with this Plutonian mission. The first is related to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, the gas and oil, which comes from fossil bones buried deep beneath the Earth's surface, for example, Pluto's domain of buried treasure, have been in the news lately as reports of a major oil spill off the coast of Southern California has caused as much as 140 million gallons of oil to seep onto the pristine beaches that the LA Times reported, quote, teem with wildlife. Now, last week, some of you may remember that I also pointed out that the U.S. government has now named 23 species of birds, fish, and one plant obsolete or extinct, and that many in that particular field have noted that we're on target to lose at least 100 more over the next several years. So this is bringing that to light, right? Pluto station. And Pluto brings to light that which is obsolete or in danger of becoming so. In Capricorn, as I like to put it, it's death to business as usual. I noticed also an op-ed piece the other day in the New York Times that reads in part as follows, and here I'm quoting. This month, the University of Minnesota, Boston University, and Harvard announced that they will divest from the fossil fuel industry. These decisions are the latest wins for both the planet and for activism against the industry most responsible for the climate crisis. The three universities join over 1,300 schools and institutions, including foundations, pension funds, institutional investors, and others, that have divested or announced plans to divest, at least in part, from fossil fuels. In doing so, they have affirmed that continued investment in fossil fuels is neither financially responsible nor morally defensible. End quote. So we're coming close to the beginning of the end or extinction of our use of fossil fuels to, be one of the major sources of energy in this country. So as Pluto nears the end of its transit in Capricorn, beginning in March 2023, we may well see the death of fossil fuels as our main source of energy, especially as automobile companies now gear up to produce more electric vehicles in the coming years. We also have the Pandora Papers, or revelations about how billionaires have been hiding their money from taxation and the extent to which they've gone to do this. Not to mention how many of our world's leaders have been doing this for years, even though they preside over populations with massive financial inequity. And then finally, there's today's report that federal authorities have charged 18 former NBA players with defrauding the league's health care plan out of nearly $4 million, according to an indictment unsealed in federal court in New York. From 2017 through 2020, the indictment states the players submitted phony invoices to the NBA's health benefit plan for reimbursements for services they never actually received, from a chiropractor's office, 2 dental offices, and a wellness office that specialized in, quote, sexual health, anti-aging, and general well-being. So these guys are players in more ways than one, And I think it's interesting because it kind of fits in nicely with this stuff about the billionaires. It's like, if you're a billionaire, right, if you're an NBA player, we're going to assume you're making more money annually than the average American, right? So why do you need to scam? Why do you need to hide? All right. So that's the point here, that these are the kinds of things that Pluto is unearthing or bringing out into the light or bringing up into consciousness for us all. So who knows what lies ahead as Pluto slowly stations now? More financial abuses and or sexual scandals may be unearthed. I'd mentioned too that I think it was last week, R.J. Kelly, the musician, was convicted of rape and sexual abuse. And there's an awful lot of talk now around dark money that funds campaigns here in the U.S. too, political campaigns, as politicians apparently feel less reluctant to call each other out for taking such funds. So stay tuned and keep your eyes peeled, as my dad used to say. Meanwhile, Venus stationed direct earlier today on October 7th, and we may become a bit more enthusiastic about our relationships from now, or at least from now, until she enters Sirius Capricorn on November 5th. The key here is to allow our partnerships, through looking at the kinds of relationships we attract, to become tools of conscious enlightenment about ourselves. Watch out for over-optimism and pie-in-the-sky unrealistic expectations, as Venus and Jupiter-ruled Sag can lead us astray if we're not grounded. Meanwhile, the Sun meets Mars in Libra late tonight, October 7th, or early tomorrow, the 8th, depending on your time zone, and this is followed by the Sun's conjunction with Mercury on October 9th, when Mercury meets Mars as well. The Sun-Mars conjunction gives us the energy to stand up for what we want and to be recognized. Sun-Mercury lets us speak what's on our mind, take the initiative, start new plans and conversations, announce our intentions, and be open to exchanging ideas and plans with others. And the Mercury-Mars meetup, while it portends strong intellectual capability, also cautions us not to get too hot in our communications. Debate is positive, while yelling, bullying, or taking ourselves too seriously now becomes potentially antithetical to any goal of negotiation and compromise, because it belies that we believe we can get our message across calmly and confidently without reverting to defensiveness. In short, we get more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? Now, when Saturn stations direct at 6 degrees and 53 minutes Aquarius on October 10th, we've completed a period since when Saturn stationed retrograde at 13 degrees 3 minutes of Aquarius on May 23rd, that may, in that interim, have delayed our plans or taken someone or something away from us. Often, Saturn transits eliminate people or a person, jobs, funds, etc. from our lives, which can result in making us feel lonely, isolated, depressed, unloved, etc. But what it pays to remember is that Saturn, the Lord of Karma, is showing us that such people and things have outlived their purpose or usefulness in terms of our future soul growth. Remember, Saturn is also wisdom. And this kind of death, whether it was literal or figurative, symbolizes the internal demise of any ego investment in the house of affairs through which Saturn's been transiting. So you want to look at your chart and see what house he's been going through. In turn, this creates a path forward now for us to finish whatever plans we've been working on during the retrograde period, or it eliminates with finality, quote, any non-productive relationships, projects, or activities, as Erin Sullivan puts it in her book, Retrograde Planets. Further, when space in our lives opens up, right, something's removed, creates a new space, it's meant to be filled by something new, and that something, if we are trusting of Saturn, will be more in alignment with our soul's purpose moving forward. So as Saturn begins to move forward slowly now, we may begin to reconcile any loss by welcoming in the new with hope, optimism, and joy, especially with Venus and Sag right now, giving us that buoyant boost and adding greater meaning to the navigation of partnerships as we're still under the auspices of this month's Libra energy. Mercury retrograde repeats its quincunx, it's 150 degree in conjunct to Uranus October 12th, cautioning us again to beware of a lack of clarity in our communication and that of others. Evasive tactics may evaporate, however, at least a little bit, when Venus in Sagittarius sextiles Saturn in Aquarius October 13th, bringing us opportunities to sit down with our partners and establish clarity about our expectations. Some confusion may remain, though, since the Sun quincunxes Neptune later that day, potentially re-injecting some obfuscation and the sin of omission or leaving out pertinent data during such discussions. However, the Sun's trine to Jupiter October 15th may prove fortuitous in terms of catapulting us into the promotion of peace, harmony, and good fortune in terms of achieving our individual goals. And this is a great time, as Rob Ham puts it in his book, Planets in Transit, and I'll quote here, to use this ability to see your life as a whole, Take stock of what you're doing and see how it fits your real needs. Okay, so this transit makes me hope, Venus and Sag style, that our politicians on Capitol Hill all have good astrologers advising them right now. So now I would like to introduce this week's guest. John Townley introduced the composite chart technique for analyzing relationships in his book, The Composite Chart, early in his astrological career, and 20 years later wrote the definitive work on the subject, Composite Charts, The Astrology of Relationships. He's pioneered techniques for astrological cycle analysis and proposed a new physical basis for astrology. Also the author of Planets in Love, Dynamic Astrology, and Lunar Returns, John's a past president of the Astrologers Guild of America, was the editor of the Astrological Review, and has contributed to professional and popular astrological magazines, including The Mountain Astrologer, Dell Horoscope, and many more. A journalist whose books have been translated into 7 languages, John's also an elected member of the American Society of Journalists and Authors, a historian, preservationist, performer, and record producer who's been featured on the BBC, CBC, PBS, NBC, CBS, ABC, CNET or CNET, and Granada Radio and TV, Polish National Radio TV, Voice of America, Armed Forces Radio, and cable TV. Phew! You can find
and this station too.
And this station too, right? And Karmic Evolution. And you can find John's website at astrococktail.com. John, thank you.
Hey,
for
how you doing,
today.
Sherry?
I'm
Fantastic.
good. How are you? How are you?
Good. Boy, this Mars Sun conjunction is really frantic. Boy, I've been hearing nothing but people. It's like hot as a fire. Hard even to say what it's hot as. It is just everything is just popping because the energy levels are so, the combined energy of Sun and Mars together exactly the same place is just unremitting. And you can see it in the news, as you've been pointing out, but it's in everyday life. You feel like you can't stop. One thing happens and the next thing happens, and it just doesn't let up.
Yeah, well, which is kind of interesting because of all the retrograde energy right now, right? It's like salmon swimming upstream. Like, who's going to win? Is the energy slow, or is the energy trying to bust out? And then what what kind of result does that have, right? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, we're at a point though. We're on a cycle of the retros because all the planets are in one side of the sky basically. We have half the year everything's retro, and then half the year nothing's retro. And we're at that point when it's flipping over this month. We'll start out with 6 retro planets, you end with 2, and then there'll be none by the end of the following month. So it's suddenly, bam, you go from this very held back retro thing. But it's important to understand that the retro, you think of it as backwards, as being away from things and not being able to get in touch with them. But it's really the opposite. Is you're in too close familiarity with stuff, and you're having to refigure out how to deal with them. Because if you look at the actual orbits of the planets, and when everything is retrograde, that's when we are on the side of the Sun where all the other planets are. Then everything's direct. That everything's retro, because as we pass them by, they appear to be going backwards. Right. And that's because we're closer to them than we ever are, but we're also going faster than they are. So they look like they're going backwards. But in terms of proximity, gravitationally, magnetically, and everything, that's the strongest they get. So we have to deal with it. In other words, you've not been worried about Saturn stuff, and suddenly you're right up next door to Saturn, and say, "Oh, I guess I better deal with that." And that's what the Saturn retrograde is. And of course, when they're all in one spot, half the year you're dealing with it like crazy, and then half the year you don't care. You're out in space, and literally, the Earth is on the other side of the Sun, out. Nobody home, There's nobody on that side of the solar. Nobody on the whole side of the solar system except the Earth is when everything's direct, and that's where
lights on, nobody's home. That's what you make me think.
That's right, exactly. And we've been doing that since a few years before the election, and we'll continue doing it into 26 and 27 until that bowl breaks up and the planets start to distribute around the sun instead of all on one side of it.
Right, right. It's interesting for new births, right? You know, the different configuration, chart configurations from.
It'll be nice to get out of that sort of back and forth trap that we've been in, because the problem is you overdo each one. You get to, you ignore things too blithely, and we just spent 4 years of the price of that.
Right.
And then you get worried about things too much and get too close to situations, and it goes back and forth in extremes that are not comfortable to live with. And it's more comfortable to live with a more wide open sky where there's always something. Wherever you are, you're always passing by something, but you're not doing them all at the same time. And that's some that's sort of the normal state of the sky. And right now we're in about a 10-year period where we're missing on that.
Right, right. Yeah, myopic is what I guess I would say, right? It's either too myopic or too abstract, right? It's like
exactly right.
Seesaw between one or the other. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, I know you're giving a lecture, as I mentioned earlier, at the Astrological Society for Princeton on Sunday. And, because you are the inventor, essentially, of the composite chart, and I know, and I'm sure, right? I mean, every astrologer knows that, one of the major topics people have when they come for a consult is relationship, right? So
sure.
I'm wondering, because the sun's in Libra, Mars and Mercury's in retrograde in Libra, if you can give our listeners some background about what kind of Uranian flash of insight prompted you to invent the composite relationship chart, and what's its ultimate purpose?
Well, it's more of a Uranus flash of flashing into existence, because I didn't really invent it. It just sort of appeared on its own. And I can tell you exactly where. It was on the M15 bus, about 59th Street going up First Avenue.
You're so funny. That's hysterical.
And it was on the way from an Astrologers Guild meeting, and a friend of mine who was on the bus also. She lived further up on the Upper East Side. I live about 68th Street, and I think she lived in the 70s or 80s somewhere. And Arlene Plakon, her name was. And we were just discussing astrological stuff as we went up First Avenue, and she mentioned, I guess we were talking about midpoints and whatnot, and she said that, that someone had mentioned to her, or she thinks it was someone at ESAR, that maybe that the Uranian folks back in the 20s and 30s, doing who originated most of the work we do now with midpoints. They sort of brought midpoints into being as an important thing in modern astrology. One or several of them had thought, well, maybe with these maybe you can make up a whole chart of nothing but midpoints between two people's charts. And I guess at that point, someone else said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea, but we have something else to do with it." that's as far as it got. So it sort of drifted like a possibility and a rumor, maybe you could do something like that. And when she mentioned it to me as that, I thought, wow, that sounds like a really good idea. And the moment I got home, I did that, and I made a chart out of the midpoints of between each in a relationship between each person's sun. Made that the sun of this composite chart, and the midpoint between the two moons would be the moon of the composite chart, and did a composite of the houses and put it into all what looked like a horoscope, and it seemed to get great results. It seemed to describe the more I did, it seemed to describe the kind of relationship people would have, that in ways it wasn't described by whether they had, sun on moon from one to the other, regular synastry, it seemed to be like sort of a standing thing in itself, sort of a set of dynamics that existed when the two people were around each other, rather than being something they had in common so much, whereas which synastry does. And I thought that was really fascinating, and I showed it to a lot of people, and they thought, "Wow, this is really great. You should write a book about it." And then I did, and it was a book, it was a small book, but it was a book outlining what the basic idea was, and then what it might mean, variations that might make it better, or what the limits of this might be, or where you could take it. Some of which turned out that were too far and you shouldn't take it there, and some of them turned out to be quite useful, and as it developed further. So it was an accident that just happened then.
No, John. I'm still calling it a Uranian flash. Okay, it was on First Avenue, heading towards 58th Street.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
That's so my Virgo rising is remembering that. So they're gonna. That's where they're gonna put your statue.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's right next to the big boar there on 59th Street in the river, right? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Why not?
Oh my God.
It will play sea chanty music.
Yeah, absolutely. You got it.
Perfect.
Yep, right.
So let me ask you this, because it may or may not sound like an obvious question, because, when we look at charts or we talk to people who are beginning, learning astrology or beginning astrology, we talk about the sun, the moon, and the ascendant as the most important points. But are these the same? Or if not, what are the most important points in a composite chart? And how do these, if in fact they do, signify whether a relationship will be long lasting or not? Because isn't that what everybody wants to know all the time? It's like you can tell people,
right.
Well, Uranus is transiting your 7th, and relationships are not necessarily meant to last, so enjoy them now. And people freak out. So you gotta talk, gently
Sure.
to them.
Well, I think that because they are sun and moon, they're the strongest gravitationally, and they're the most dynamic, and those are the most important. It's basically the same game. Ascendant is important because in a composite ascendant, you will tend to see what other people see when you see a couple together. Gee, they look like a real dynamic, active couple. Well, they have Aries rising in the composite chart, or they look kind of retreating. They seem to sort of stand in a corner and you don't see them much. Maybe that's Pisces rising, and that you tend to see kind of what you would see in a regular chart in composite charts. But the difference is that really composite charts, they're not real horoscopes. I mean, it's not a chart of any time, of any place. They're impossible. What they are is just a mathematical way of looking at the two charts put together. So they're actually a graphic tool rather than an actual chart, although you're putting it in a chart form, so naturally you try to immediately think to start doing all your regular interpretation stuff as you would with a natal chart. But you have to look out for it because it's not a chart. It's just a nice abbreviated way to see where these dynamic points are. And it's a good way of understanding it is to think, for instance, say two people have somebody has their sun in Leo, and another has their sun in Libra, just two in sextile, and say at the same degree in each one. Now, every year when person A's birthday comes around, say in Leo, then they tend to feel more energy. It's a more energetic time of year. It gives them a boost, sort of an inner ego boost, just to be there because the sun's coming back there. And the same with the other person, but they get it a little bit later. They get it when the sun's in Libra. So basically, in late summer, the Leo person's getting a nice jolt, and they're feeling high on the hog, and then they start to decline a little bit, and then the Libra person starts to get a little higher on the hog until they're at their max. Well, right in the middle of Virgo, the midpoint between the two, which is where the composite sun is. That's the point when their level of highness, as it were, switches, and one's down starts to be down below the other, and the other starts to be above the other. So they're handing off their energy levels at this point. And that's what a composite chart tells you, and that's where one, if you look at it just energy levels, one is getting a little less energy and the other's getting more, so they should share a little bit more. Let me give you a little more energy. It's a time when you should switch and the other partner takes over. Or it can be a power point where one can take over, and it's getting stronger and the other's getting weaker, and therefore it can be a power game being played. And that will be largely determined as to whether that point, that middle of Virgo point, is then in the same chart squared by Pluto or something like that, in which case it's more likely to be a power thing and a difficult relationship. But say it's trine Jupiter, then there'll be a lot of generosity involved, and you'll get a person giving their extra energy that they just gotten to help the other person through, and so that's what it really tells you. It tells you sort of the dynamics of all of the planetary cycles that people are going through, because basically that's what a planet tells you in a natal chart is how strong it is when it comes back to its own place, or when the sun comes to it, or when the moon comes to it. It's a place where that energy gets greater or lesser depending on what's hitting it. And what the composite chart tells you is where one person passes that on to the next. It's like a handover point, like if you were in a race, a relay race. Yeah, that's where you would hand the baton from one to the other. And if those are well aspected, then they get along great and they win the relay race. If they're if it's not, they drop the baton or fumble it or throw the baton at each other or whatever.
That's so. No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would say, it's pretty fascinating when you describe it that way. So thank you for that. I was thinking, when I studied with astrologer Stephen Forrest, and he wrote a book called Sky Mates about composite and synastry, and Rob Hand's written, interpretations of composite charts, right? So Stephen Forrest talked about how to discern whether a composite chart favors the energy of one partner over another in the relationship. So in other words, if the two people together, one is more dominant than the other. And I'm wondering if you agree.
Yeah,
that was something.
I mentioned that was mentioned in the first book that I wrote.
Which he probably read. So yeah.
Yeah, that's where they got it from. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But it also
so
it should be
up,
obvious.
Everyone, this is the guy who. What did I say?
Yeah.
He doesn't like initiate. Okay. He birthed, you intuited, whatever, right?
Yeah. So, but at any rate, that would be one of the first questions one would ask, and to try to investigate is, does this give, and basically what it does is, if you've got, say, we're just looking at the sun, one sun to another, the same, using the same example. If you had your Mars at that Virgo sun midpoint, your natal Mars, that means that you would have extra energy to give. And you would probably energetically dominate that particular situation, and be the go-to person in the composite, in the relationship, to get a little extra boost. If you had your Saturn there, then you'd be kind of the person to slow things down, or maybe to cause them to come to a screeching halt. Who knows? Or stabilize them, if it's a well-aspected Saturn. So yes, it does, and it can make one partner dominant over the other, but it has something that, because of that very function, there's something else going on with it that's very, very useful to know, and this is something that people tend to have missed in astrology in general, because they don't have a basic theory, bottom line, as to physically why astrology works, or what the actual physics of it is, and if there's a logical physical basis to it. Most people just give up and say, "Oh, I don't know, astrology works. Who cares how it works?" Well, it's very important. It's very important to know how something works, because then if you make a mistake, if you don't know how it works, you can't fix it. You just say, well, it
Mm-hmm.
seems to have goofed up there. Go on.
Right.
Whereas like an engineer is using laws of physics, he knows if he makes a mistake, he goes back and finds out where it happened and corrects it based on the physical laws he knows. And one of the things that a composite chart does is that because it's not something you grew up with, well, unless it's your brother or your sister, but it's something that started at one point, and it hasn't had any transits to it. There's no rhythm there yet. The moon hasn't gone around it a few times and touched all the points and made people feel it, and then come back and touch them again. And this is what happens in secondary progressions to a natal chart. You grow up in your first 3 months. That's your whole life in depiction of these transits in very, very early childhood, going over again and again and solidifying your chart. Basically, your chart starts as nothing. It's a time and point in space. It could be anything. But then what happens to you as those transits go over you as a very young infant? It solidifies all of those patterns inside your own chart. You begin to have associations with them, and the whole chart becomes a series of associations and expectations, which people call character. And the composite chart, you have the advantage of that in a new relationship, it's just starting, and so you don't have any of those fixed things inside that are tugging you all the time. And if you see that chart's difficult, it may be very immediately stimulating. Maybe you have Mars Venus. One person has the Mars on the Mars Venus of the other person, or something like that, and it's a hot relationship. But you look at the composite chart and you see a lot of Pluto squares and Saturn stuff and coming down the line, and the longer that composite keeps on in existence, the worse things are going to get. Then you'll know the composite is a warning for you to get out of that. Or the other way around, you may find that it's nothing's really happening right now, but look at the composite. This could really go somewhere if you stick around and let all those things gel and materialize that are there in the potential of the composite. And so it's a very useful thing, because one partner can wind up dominating, or the whole thing can be a dreadful situation, or the other way around. But you have the time to get out, or make sure you stay in, even though you might say, "Oh, I don't care about this." But if you look at the composite and say, "I think I'm going to stick around and see what happens here," because you look at the composite and say, "Wow, this is really great." It gives you a little bit more influence as to whether on decision making within a relationship that you wouldn't have otherwise, and it allows you to intellectually override whatever is immediately motivating you at the moment. Which the younger you are, the more trouble you get in for that.
Exactly. So given what you said about the fact that there's no time and longitude and latitude for the birth of the composite, right? It's not like a natal. Can you use the composite chart as a forecasting tool? In other words, can it be placed in a bi-wheel or a tri-wheel with transits and progressions, secondary progressions, and to look at upcoming potential relationship challenges, or is it all inherent within?
Yeah, you definitely can. It definitely responds to transits. You can't progress the chart itself because there's no time to progress it from. And also, the only way you can make a progressed, because there is no time and place to progress it from, the only way you can make a progressed chart is to make a composite chart of the two natal progressed charts. But the problem is that keeps changing. And by the time, and therefore it can't cement itself. It can't settle in. And therefore it's never 2 times the same way. And the result,
It's
it
unstable.
never has, exactly, it doesn't have the stability of what would happen in a natal chart. And interestingly, the first person to really note that back to me, because I noted that was the case. I was getting no results from progressions at all. And the first person who noted that to me was Rob Han, who said, yeah, absolutely. You can't use secondary progressions. No matter how you construct them, they don't work.
Right.
Composite,
But you can use the transits, right?
But transits seem to work, yeah, because the transits are transits to real places, which is the midpoint between your two charts.
Right. Gotcha. Interesting.
So,
Interesting.
and basically, this is not a new concept. As we think of midpoints themselves being as sort of a new thing that the Germans invented in the 20s and 30s. But that's not really true. The concept of besiegement goes back to the Renaissance at least, and in where you say where something exactly between two other planets is considered to be besieged by them, particularly if they're malefic planets, and that was considered an important thing. And basically what that was saying was that the midpoint between those two besieging planets was an important point. And astrologers generally agreed, but they didn't turn it into a whole system as the Germans did. The Germans took that one concept, which was an important concept in traditional astrology, and just extrapolated it logically into where it would affect you anywhere. And the composite chart is similar. It's just an extrapolation of something that's fairly obvious and anybody should have thought of and probably did, but never did anything with it until they did, and
they weren't on a bus. Yeah.
Exactly, and the right bus at the right
time on the right street.
Exactly, you got it. So
let me ask you a question. If someone comes to you for a composite chart interpretation, right, or reading,
all right,
do you need like both parties, or can you do it for one person with the other person not being part of the consult, or like how does it work? Because it seems like a tricky thing, right? Because there's always this thing called fate, right? So if like an astrologer is looking at a composite chart, how would you consult the client? I'm just curious.
Well, that's a lot. That falls in the area basically of ethics, and which is kind of outside of astrology, and therefore I can only say it's up to you. I mean that doesn't apply just to composite charts. It applies to somebody else's chart with a synastry, or knowing somebody else's chart to begin with and saying, "Oh, what's going to happen to them? I know what their chart is. Do I think they're going to have difficult transits coming up next month so I can take advantage of them, or because I can go help them?" And you're hitting the same issues there as you would. Do I share both sides of a couple, everything I might be able to get astrologically with both sides? And the answer is no, you don't. Otherwise, not in a capitalistic society, you don't, because people are naturally competitional, and part of astrology is you want to know what other people don't know, because that's a part of the advantage of having more knowledge. If do you have to share all of your knowledge with everybody? No. There are certain times you should, yes. Where that ethically falls is up to you. And if it's going to be a situation where you think someone might be hurt by it in a particular client or a particular situation that they're in, then you will have to decide based on those issues there. And it's an ethical decision, because ethics and astrology, astrology is a tool. It's not ethical unto itself. Ethics come from someplace else, and you have to apply ethics to astrology when you're dealing with it. But you can't dig one out of the other. It's astrology is part of nature, and nature is not a plus or a minus or a good or a bad. Nature is just nature.
Right, gotcha. Well, we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So Before I ask you how people can reach you and to give out your website again and talk about, how they can join the webinar on Sunday, I want to skip to just asking you, because you talked briefly at the beginning about the Sun, Mars, and the planets all retrograde going to start moving ahead soon. With Saturn moving forward, and Uranus, of course, is going to stay retrograde until January, but they're going to square exact again at the end of this year on December 24th. What do you have anything you could add to this discussion about, what is the result of that, what we've been dealing with all year, and what will be the repercussions, of the square as it starts to separate?
Yeah, well, basically Saturn and Uranus is because it's a square, it's a pointless conflict. With opposition, you'll get creative conflict, perhaps. But squares chase their tails, and they don't get too much good out of stuff. It's because they're going in separate directions. Other ships passing in the night, as it were. And what you get is Saturn, which is traditionalist, older ways of looking at things that are set in their ways, and Uranus, which is the new stuff, the new kids on the block, the new technology, the new everything, and one is set against the other, but they're not set directly like they're having a showdown in an arena or something. They're both fighting each other's shadows, because they're not pointed towards each other. They're pointed at right angles to each other. So when they fire something, they don't hit each other. They hit something down the road.
Wow.
And the result is you have a lot of talk and a lot of smoke, but not a lot of fire. And of course, the one that stays where it is the longest wins out, and that will be Uranus, as always. The outer planet, whatever the outer planetary shift is going to be, the Saturn moves on, and the Uranus, the outer planet one, keeps on doing it, so it wins. And the outer planets always win because they're the bigger
picture. That's so interesting. I'm an archetypal astrologer and psychological, so I look at the mythology, and in the mythology, Saturn wins, right? So it's kind of like, well, my idea is that the foundation will hold, but it has to I guess in a sense, like the foundation holds, but on top of it is a new structure, kind of, you know what I mean? So one that's more in alignment with Uranus.
Well, one of your problems with doing the mythology of planets is that once you hit past Saturn, where basically everybody was in agreement that the planets, that as they were named back in ancient times, sort of synced up with the gods. But once you got to the new stuff, the fact that Uranus is named after one of the the Titans, the earlier
sky god.
The sky god, has nothing to do with anybody's agreement that that's the case at all. In fact, if you look at the history of it, we came within a millimeter of Uranus being named Neptune.
Huh. All right, you know what? You're freaking me out now, John.
Yeah, and that was because of Astro. This is kind of like being on the bus, and it was a conflict between the people, in both the cases of Uranus and Neptune, getting their names. It had to do with fights inside the astronomical societies between the French and the English and the Germans. And you'll see, if anybody's in NCGR, they've got the journal now, but if not, you can find one. The current NCGR journal is entirely about new planets from Uranus on, but particularly the new ones. About, how do you tell what they mean? Do you use their name, the mythology that happens to have been laid on them by modern people, which is often very, very faulty? How do you really tell? And I have the sort of one of the two lead-off introductory articles in that issue, and it's worth reading all of that stuff because there's a lot to say about it, and it will make you think differently when you say things just like what you said. So you're comparing Saturn with Uranus. Well, our modern planet Uranus has nothing to do with the sky god at all. Nor does Neptune.
You're still freaking me out. So that means, of course, I have to read your article, and then
Yeah.
and then we'll talk, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that there might not be some overlap because people tried to put in as much overlap as possible, but to a great extent, we were the people that were naming it weren't the astrologers, so
Right.
something
But
else,
there's also theory like Jacob Schwartz's theory about the asteroids, that the NASA scientists named the asteroids, it got to a point where the whole group of asteroids was named for beers, right? I mean, so clearly,
right?
the times matter, but we're running short on time. I mean, the only thing I would say is that the planets in depth psychology, right, represent the unconscious. So they were named when they were discovered, but you're saying that is so far in the future to when the archetype existed, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
and also
gotcha.
it's also when the eventual meaning finally got together. We're still getting our meanings together of Pluto. It's changed several times, even the last couple of decades, as to how.
I'd love to have a discussion. I'd love to moderate a discussion between you and Liz Green. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You got it. Sure.
That would be great. Let's see if we can get her to agree. Anyway,
Right.
Listen, we have like a minute left, so I just want you to be able to reiterate to where people can reach you on your website, how they can buy your books, keep track of your work, join us on Sunday for your webinar, book a reading with you, etc.
Right. AstroCocktail.com is where you can find it all, except for the Princeton thing. I don't have anything posted on that, so you just have to go to Princeton.
ASPNJ.org. Yeah. ASPNJ.org.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's for like Sunday. And part of that is about composite charts. It starts about composite charts, but it's really about how composite charts is a really good example of people walking into new techniques that they don't really know what they mean or whether they mean anything, and sort of applying them willy-nilly until they start throwing in things that makes it all apples and oranges, and it looks like it was a good idea, but it turns out to be either be meaningless or, worse than that, a misinterpretation. So it depends on how much you think about, how in touch with reality you are, to keep your logical steps as you go through extrapolating astrological techniques, to keep them on the ground, because a lot of people don't. Yeah,
okay.
A lot of people
Very
don't.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's
Yep. I'm encouraging everyone to go aspnj.org, sign up, join ASP, look at the schedule, and you will be
great. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're a great bunch. Yep.
Absolutely. So I encourage people, and in 2 lectures you make back the price of the annual, so it's definitely worth it. John, thank you so much for making yourself available today. I'm looking forward to Sunday. And thank you to everyone else for joining us. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, October 14th, for another episode of the show. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go